The Conquer Worry Show, episode number 9.
This show is not to be considered medical advice. The contents of the show are for informational purposes only. Nothing should be considered or used as a substitute for professional medical or mental health advice, diagnosis, or treatment. If you are struggling, please seek professional medical assistance and call 911 if there is an emergency. Global hotlines can be found on conquerworry.org.
Welcome to the Conquer Worry Show, the show dedicated to creating awareness of the resources that are available for those who struggle with worry, anxiety, or depression. If you are struggling now, if you have struggled in the past, or if someone you love is struggling, this is the show for you. To another episode of the Conquer Worry Show. I am your host, Jay Coulter. I am not a psychologist, a psychiatrist, a counselor, or a social worker. Just someone who has struggled with anxiety and depression in the past, found a way to manage them, and now I'm dedicated to creating awareness of the resources that are out there for those who struggle. This episode, as well as the next episode of the Conquer Worry Show, are going to focus on a web series project done by Australian filmmaker Luke Eve. On this episode, I'm going to play an interview I conducted with Luke where he's going to explain how this dark comedy could be beneficial to any of our listeners that are struggling with mental health issues because of the lens that he is presenting some of our struggles. And then on the next episode, I'm going to interview Henry Nixon, who is the star of the show. So this is a longer interview. I want to get right to it. And while you are listening to this episode, check out their website, lowlifeseries.com, lowlifeseries.com. Now here is our interview with Luke Eve. I am excited to have Luke Eve on the show today. Luke is an award-winning Australian film director and producer. His production company, More Sauce, was founded back in 1999, and we feel that a recent project that he's rolling out called Low Life would strike a chord with our audience. So I'm thrilled to have him on the show. Luke, welcome.
Hey, Jay. Thanks very much for having me. I'm really thrilled to be on here.
Sure. We're really excited about your project here. So before we get started, could you tell our listeners a little bit about your professional background?
Yeah, I'm. I guess in essence, I'm a filmmaker. I started out as a photographer, actually, and I always had an interest in music videos, actually, and feature films. That was always the thing that really got me excited. So I would actually take photographs of bands back in Australia and in and around Sydney, sort of unsigned bands and things like that. And that got me as a way of, being introduced to musicians that I liked. And then I would use that to maneuver into making a music video for them. And then once I started getting a few music videos, I then started, directing a few commercials. And then once I did a few commercials, that got me doing some television work. So it was, in some ways, maybe a bit of a standard path for a filmmaker. I was quite lucky in some ways, although, it's a long path. It took a long time to get to the point where you start actually making money and getting jobs in television and things like that. But that's sort of my background, I guess. And at the same time, I was doing a lot of short films as well, which has always been the thing that I really love doing, sort of, long-form storytelling and trying to put it in some sort of format. And that's also helped me trying to develop a couple of feature films that we sort of have going as well. And while they're sort of, happening and being developed and feeling very close, we started working on this project, which is a web series called Low Life.
Okay. Well, before we get to Low Life, I'm curious about the music videos. I bet you really had to deal with some interesting personalities.
Yeah. Making music videos is a lot of fun. It's funny, if you could make money out of doing them, I would chase it as a full-time career. I actually loved making music videos. And I started out doing them maybe about 10 years ago when back in Australia there was still a decent sort of budget for actually being able to make these things, whereas now, budgets have just kind of completely collapsed. So it makes it very difficult. You generally end up just making them for the love of it or for building up your reel or your contacts. But I love musicians. A lot of my friends are either filmmakers or musicians, and they're interesting people. They tend to run on their own clock. They see the world in a very different way as well. I actually love talking to musicians because they see and interpret the world, I think, differently. I'm quite a visual person, whereas obviously they maybe look at things just differently, and I love the way they express themselves. I particularly love talking to people that are actually quite shy. I would deal with a lot of musicians that were painfully shy, and as soon as they got in front of the camera or up on stage, they just turned into something completely different, and I was always blown away by that. I always loved that power of expression. So in a way, I miss doing them. I wish I could still do them. I do the odd one here and there if it's for a band that I really love or for a friend. But, unfortunately, I don't do many anymore.
Okay, but like you said, it was probably a great start, and it seems like you had a fairly linear path in the film industry.
Yeah.
Or production industry is probably a better way to put it.
Exactly. It's kind of difficult to know what path you should follow, I think, when you're in the creative arts. And I remember having a teacher at film school just saying, look, don't compare yourself to other people. Just things will happen differently for different people. And I think you get into trouble if you start comparing yourself and worrying that somebody else is doing really well or they're doing something different than you. Just, things just unfold in different ways. And so for me, that was the way it worked out. I would make the odd, music video, which then led to commercials, which led to short films, which led to TV. So it does feel quite linear, but it was also all over the place in some ways as well. I would go off and still do the odd photography job and other bits and pieces. You're always kind of scrapping to try and find work here and there and make things work for you.
Sure. All right, so Low Life, it is a web series. Before we get started talking about it, could you define exactly what a web series is?
Yeah, a web series. A web series is sort of like a junior television series, to be honest. It's episodic. Generally, there's no rules, but for some reason they tend to be a series of sort of anywhere between 6 and 10 episodes, and they vary in length as well. Like a popular sort of length is 5 or 6 minutes. Sometimes they're a little bit longer, but they're a way of telling stories, episodic stories, over a sort of a shorter format, I guess, as opposed to a TV series. And because they exist online, generally you can take more chances. You don't have networks involved, so you can be a little bit more cutting edge. But as a result of that also means that you generally have less budget to play with as well. And I think the difficulty with that as well is that you then try and find an audience, trying to cut through all of the clutter that exists online is difficult. So if you can create something that has a little bit of a hook or has some sort of interest for people, then I think a web series is a great way to go. Again, starting out in production, I would make a lot of short films early on, and I've sort of come to learn that a lot of people aren't looking to short films as much as they used to for a calling card. A lot of people now are looking to web series, and whether or not as a director or as a storyteller you can sustain a story told over several episodes. So I had been wanting to do a web series for a while, and this was the one that sort of popped up. Okay,
so Low Life is your first web series?
Yeah, Low Life is my first web series. I had played with the idea of a couple of other concepts over the years, and in fact I even teamed up with a couple of writers and producers on some other ideas, and we never quite got those off of the ground for various reasons, as is always the case when you're involved in sort of doing personal projects. But this was an idea that was quite personal to me, I guess, and so I was quite driven and quite determined to make sure it ended up happening.
So what exactly was the genesis of Low Life then? You mentioned it being personal.
Yeah, Low Life. it's hard to sort of pinpoint an exact genesis, but it's probably a number of factors. But the main one is rooted in the idea of trying to explore the concept of depression, I guess, and it was something that I had sort of battled with, I guess, my entire life, and had never really explored it, to be honest. And the reason why I had never really explored it is because I'd never really embraced it. I'd never really sort of stopped to think about the fact that I had depression. It wasn't chronic. It wasn't terribly bad like I know other people have it, but it was there. You know, it was definitely something that I had battled with through the years, and there were certain bouts that were way worse than others, and it was, you know, it lay kind of dormant. It was inside of me for a long time, and I think, you know, and this is, I think, a pretty common thing for people with depression, is that people feel embarrassed talking about it because it's stigmatized. Nobody wants to come out and say that they have an issue with mental health or depression, or because there's this, you know, unfortunately, maybe this concept around it that you're strange or you're weird or you can't be dealt with. And I think now there's this huge dialogue that's being started about mental health. And this was what I really wanted with Low Life, is to actually be able to explore the concept of depression and what it's like to have it, what it's like to struggle with it and not be able to talk about it, and also what it's like to even just sort of come to terms with it. Like I said, I was aware that I was sort of, you know, going through things, but maybe I thought I was just angsty or moody, or, you know, you try to make up excuses for it. And I started realizing that, you know, what I had was depression. And so I thought that made for very interesting subject matter. And so at the point last year, I'd actually made the move from living in Sydney, Australia, to come over to the US and move to LA. And before I settled, I went to New York to catch up with an old friend of mine who was a writer. And we started talking about these different ideas and our own sort of battles, I guess, with depression and what it meant. And I was also really interested in this concept of masculinity, especially Australian masculinity. We come from a very sort of tough male culture, I guess, where men don't really talk about their feelings. And so that's another reason why men with depression never really talk about it. And so Adam, the writer, and I started talking about these ideas. And then I went away. I came back to LA, where I settled, and that was a bit of a tough period, because I just moved from Sydney, where I was getting lots of work, and I moved to LA, where I was starting afresh, and I had a lot of time to think and ponder. And I sort of came up with this idea that, you know, I think it would be great to explore depression as a project, as a story. And I didn't want to do it in an earnest way, or do it in a way that was so serious that it would maybe put people off. And so I thought it would be great if you could look at it as almost as a comedy, or as a black comedy, so that you could poke a bit of fun at it. That's not to say it's not a serious topic. It's just I found that whenever I was sad or depressed or going through a bout, that, you know, the thing that often shook me from it was laughter and comedy. So that was, you know, there's all of these factors. I hope I've answered your question reasonably well. It's a number of all of these things that sort of came together that made me want to make a series about depression.
No, absolutely. And I can relate to a lot of the things you're talking about, and I can tell you a good number of our listeners can as well. So with regards to the storyline, without giving much away, like what is the premise of the story?
The premise of Low Life is basically about this guy called Jeff, who on the surface seems to have it all. Like, you know, he's got a great job in advertising. He's got a beautiful girlfriend. You know, on the surface, everybody would look at him and think that he's fine. But deep down, he knows that he's suffering from something, and he's just not quite sure what it is. And the web series format allowed us to set up a structure whereby every episode was a so-called sort of solution, I guess, for depression. And so we had one episode is alcohol, one is pills, one is intervention, you know. And we're not saying these are definite solutions. We're just saying, especially as a man, whenever you kind of admit to another friend of yours, especially in Australia, that you're feeling a bit sad, you know, that the typical response from a friend is, oh, you just need to go out and get drunk. So that was, it's a very typical, because, you can't be depressed. Men don't get depressed. So let's take you out and get you drunk. That's just what needs to happen. So that was the first episode. And then we went on to more sort of traditional, medication and therapy and then intervention. So every episode has this sort of solution. And we were careful to basically say that not one particular solution works. Everybody is different, but we just wanted to use that episodic structure as a way of exploring these different options. And also that allowed us to poke a bit of fun at it as well. But there's this trajectory that Jeff goes through as he starts out not quite knowing what it is to realizing that, something is amiss, and then he deals with it. So, and we tell all of that in 6 episodes, 6-minute episodes. So it all gets wrapped up quite nicely in about 36 minutes, which is great.
Well, I feel like I can already relate to Jeff.
Yeah, and look, I think a lot of Jeff is a lot of my own personal stories and a lot of stories from Adam, the writer. We placed in there different scenarios that we both had dealt with or both wanted to explore. And so that's, I guess, what I meant earlier as well about it being quite a personal project in that, there's definitely lots of me and Jeff, I guess. And
sure.
And it was cathartic in a way, sort of playing that out. It became quite an amazing project, actually.
Well, tell us a little bit about the cast.
So the cast of Lowlife is really interesting because, like I said, I had just moved from Sydney to Los Angeles, and I was pretty keen to make something, and I guess it was easy for me to be able to reach out to a number of Australians that were already here. So I contacted two actors, one of whom was a guy by the name of Henry Nixon. He was somebody I had worked with a little bit back in Australia, and we'd sort of knocked around a few times as friends and had a couple of drinks. And we weren't real close, but we would bump into each other a lot. And towards the end of the writing process, I sort of felt like he would be perfect, actually, for Jeff. And I took a long time to maybe offer it up to him, just because in my mind, casting is so crucial. I wanted to just make sure that I felt like he was right. And then as soon as I started talking to Henry about the role, it was a no-brainer. It was a perfect fit. I knew he would knock it out of the park. And then the lead actress is Claire Vanderboom, also an Australian actress who was living here. And I had really admired her work. I'd seen a number of films that she had done back in Australia. I also saw her work on Pacific, the Steven Spielberg, Tom Hanks, Wart TV series,
sure,
and was blown away by her and just thought I would love to work with that woman at some point. Little did I know that I would get an opportunity a couple of years down the line with this script. So I was very lucky that I was able to access 2 really great actors who I guess made it a bit easier for me because they were Australian. Australian actors over here are used to, putting on accents, so doing it in an American accent was never going to be a problem. And then what we did is I reached out to an old friend of mine who was a casting director here in LA, or a casting director back in Sydney, and had a lot of contacts here with actors and different casting processes. So then we went about putting together the rest of the cast, which was an amazing process. That was great. We had a full casting session over a period of a couple of days and saw all these amazing actors for about 15 roles, actually. So it's actually quite extensive and quite a detailed web series. Often a web series might just have, 2 or 3 characters throughout the entire 6 episodes, whereas we had a cast of about 20 or 30 people. So we were lucky. So I struck gold getting to attract Henry and Claire, and then was very lucky in pulling together the rest of the cast as well. They were just wonderful to work with.
Okay. And then it looks like, from doing my pre-show research, you found your funding, or at least a portion of your funding, on Kickstarter. Tell us a little bit about that experience.
Yeah, Kickstarter was a really interesting experience. I had for the last year or so, had been receiving a lot of emails and phone calls from people that were playing with the idea of crowdfunding or were developing certain projects of their own through crowdfunding. And I was really intrigued by it, really interested to see how that would work. And initially I was a bit skeptical because it's very labor intensive, and basically what you're doing is you're emailing your friends and family around the clock and begging them for money. So it's tough, But as an artist, as somebody who's creative over the years, my friends and family were used to me begging them for money. So it wasn't too tough, actually. But it was actually an amazing process because a number of great things happened as a result of it. The first was that when I put the call out there about this project, it was the first time ever I had sort of been open or public about the fact that I had depression. I never even talked to anybody about it. My parents, my wife, nobody ever knew about it. It was just something that I kind of, harbored and dealt with. And so I emailed pretty much everybody I knew and Facebooked people and basically said, here is this project called Low Life, and it's about depression. And the reason why I want to make it is because I myself have had it. And it was amazing because I think people got this quite personal letter. And I went on to explain a little bit about what it was like to have depression. And I suddenly got flooded with loads of emails and phone calls and Facebook messages from friends telling me that, oh, my God, I had no idea, and I also have it, or I know somebody else that has it. It was amazing. And I would say 90% of those people that got back to me were men who had never admitted it, who were too nervous to speak publicly about it. And they wrote me these incredible messages of what it was like to have depression. And it was very moving, actually. And so through that process of actually putting it out there, suddenly the project had gone from being quite personal to it being quite public in some ways. Or I felt like I had this obligation, I guess, to now tell this story for a whole number of other people, which I loved. It felt like it had all this new weight put behind it. And the beauty of Kickstarter was as well is that because you're putting it out there already, people are coming back to you and you're already building an audience. So you're already building this awareness for something that you haven't yet made, so that by the time you do make it, there's, 100, 200 people or whatever it was that contributed to our Kickstarter now sitting there sort of waiting, enthusiastically for when the series comes out. So it served a great purpose. It allowed us to really touch base and hear some personal stories, and also to build great awareness and to build an audience for it. So I'm really glad we did it. We ended up raising, it was about $12,000, and then I stupidly put in the rest of the money to make it, as I've been used to doing over the years with short films and things like that. But like I said, it was a personal project, so I'm used to doing that, and it was just something that I really believed in. And I really felt like I started having a bit of an obligation actually to all of these people. So I really wanted to make something special.
Well, I definitely personally can relate to that. It sounds a little bit like Conquer Worry, and I know you and I talked about this last week. Yeah. It's really a labor of love, and You're not always compensated financially for things that you do.
No, but there's something special about creating something that is actually helping other people, which is what I was saying to you, Jay, about the work that you guys do is phenomenal. That must make you feel actually very good about yourself, that you're actually being able to contribute and help people through something that you yourself have suffered with. So it's an amazing feeling.
Sure. Yeah, you're absolutely right. So, well, let's talk about the project. It's going to release April 30th. Is that correct?
Yeah, we release online on April 30th through our website, which is lowlifeseries.com. All 6 episodes will be released at once, and the reason why we're doing that is just the way we consume media these days has changed a lot. In the old days, you could release 1 episode over the course of each week. But people lose interest pretty quickly these days. People get distracted. And like I said, there's a lot of clutter out there on the internet. So what we wanted to do was build awareness and then just do one launch on April 30th and release all 6 episodes. So hopefully people will sit through and maybe watch all 6 at once, or bookmark it and come back and explore it over the course of a number of days or a number of weeks. But at least it gives people the option of being able to look at all the episodes then and there. So as I said, this is the first time I've ever released a project online, so I'm a little bit nervous about it. I'm used to sort of making projects that you either sit in a cinema and you're surrounded by an audience so you can gauge how people respond to it, or you see it on television and people will sort of comment or tweet or whatever. So this will be interesting. It'll be kind of nerve-wracking, I guess, that, once you create a piece of art, you no longer own it. You put it out there and you lose a sense of ownership over it, in a sense, which I think is actually incredibly liberating. People will interpret it and make of it what they will, and I hope it affects different people in different ways.
How do you think our audience could help support your project? They tend to be fairly good advocates for projects that they like. Do you have any thoughts?
Look, I think with things online, the best thing that people could do if they can is to actually go to lowlifeseries.com, have a look at the site, have a look at the episodes, watch them, and then share them. I think that's the way that people find out about these shows online, is through social media, just reaching out to other people, tweeting about it, Facebooking about it, emailing, sharing it with friends. And I knew deep down that this series would be, they're not 1 minute long sort of comedies of cats doing silly things. So they're not the sort of thing that's just going to get 1 million views. But I think what will happen is that they will generate a life of their own, because I think they will speak to people. The people that I've screened them for so far as a bit of a test audience that have been affected by depression have responded to it amazingly well. I've seen people laugh. I've had a few people cry in the screening. And so really I just want people to share. That would be the best thing, especially through the Conquer Worry network. I think a lot of your audience members will be able to relate to it in some way, or will be able to know somebody that has gone through a similar thing. So please share it around through social media.
Good. I know our audience will appreciate this series, and we're going to do what we can to get the word out. Thanks
so much, Jay.
Yeah, we really like what you're doing. And I got to tell you, the fact that you're willing to share about your personal experiences, and then you've gone off and made a video series, a web series about it. I tell you, I've got a lot of respect for people who are willing to talk about these types of problems, because I personally know how utterly hard it is. But like you, I've had the same experience where people that you never thought struggled with anything reach out to you and say, hey, you know what, Luke? You know what, Jay? I'm struggling. I need help. I can't believe you're willing to talk about it. I feel better now.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? It was like I was saying about the character of Jeff. I was very much this character in a way. Like I'm very outgoing. I've got a lot of friends. I'm funny. And then for when people hear that you have these issues, they're like, really, I just didn't think that you would be the sort of person. And I found that it's generally the person that you least expect would have it are people that struggle with it. And I think also when you're that sort of person, you don't want to talk about it because people have an idea of you or who you are. So, and also I think, it was easier making the series about something that I was kind of struggling with than it was for me just to talk about it openly in a way. Because you could do it through a character, or you could sort of fictionalize it in some way. So it was a wonderful way to explore something that I'd sort of battled with and be able to take liberties with it. What's more difficult is actually talking about it now, doing interviews and things like this. But, I think that's more confronting in some ways. But
sure.
It's necessary in order to be able to share it. I think that's what people will connect with.
Sure. It's always the fear of what question are you going to get asked when it's in an interview, right?
Exactly. Hopefully I'm doing okay here.
Oh, gosh. Well, hey, our flagship question here at Conquer Worry is we feel that the best way to manage mental health struggles is to live in relentless pursuit of your life's purpose. And really, it's just a personal philosophy that we try to encourage. And really, that requires you to know what your personal philosophy is. Have you defined yours? Do you know what your life's purpose is?
Wow, that is such a great question, and it's such a confronting question. Just because you never really sit down and figure that out, do you? You go through life. 90% of people would do that. 90% of people would go through life day by day and just live it, and not really take a step back and think about, wow, what is it that I am actually doing, or what is it that I want to do? So I don't know if it's so much as a philosophy for me, but I know that my purpose, or that my goal, or the thing that I love doing is making content. I learned really early on that when I'm on a film set, I I just don't want to be anywhere else in the world. I just know that that's where I belong, and I love that. And the next place that I love being is in an audience or in a cinema, showing your work to people and having people react to it. And I think it's a very powerful position when you're creating media, whether or not it be through journalism or television or film. You have a certain sense of power because you know that people will respond to it and interpret it. And I think I like making people laugh. Like, a lot of my short films are quite twisted, they're quite dark. They probably are fueled by, some of the things that we've talked about today. And I love that I could, make somebody laugh about something. And I love that Low Life has actually made people sort of cry or people talk about it. And so I think in a way that's my purpose, is to create things that maybe will start a dialogue for people and will maybe make people sit back and actually think about their own lives and also think about maybe what their own purpose is.
That's great, Luke. That's a great answer. So,
thank you.
Listen,
okay.
I really appreciate you coming on the show, and I got to tell you, I'm going to say it again. I've got so much respect for people who are willing to talk about their mental health struggles, because most people won't, and that's okay if you don't want to talk about them. But what people who are struggling need to do is go and get help and understand that there are a lot of folks out there who are struggling, and web series like this are only going to help people realize that. So we appreciate you coming on the show, and you can count on Conquer Worry and our platforms to help you guys spread the message.
Thank you so much, Jay. I really appreciate the platform for having a bit of a chat about it today. And like I said, the work that you guys are doing is amazing. I hope that Low Life can have an effect on certain people and make people start a bit of a dialogue about it, so that maybe, like you say, that just if it changes one person's life, that they can actually open up about it and talk to somebody about it, then I think that's really important. So I think what you guys are doing is great. I'm flattered that you would have us involved.
Great, Luke. Well, hey, I appreciate it, and good luck with the show.
Thanks, Jay. I appreciate it.
Well, I know I said this in the interview, but it is always refreshing to see someone willing to come out and publicly discuss the struggles that they've had in the past with mental illness. It really just gives people who are struggling in silence some hope. And this guy, I tell you what, Luke has taken it to a whole new level creating this web series. Please, if you have an opportunity, help him out. Head on over to lowlifeseries.com, connect with the series on Facebook, on Twitter. You can find those links in the show notes at conquerworry.org. And please, if you have an opportunity, send a link to somebody who you think's struggling and just say, hey, look at what these guys have put out. What do you think? It may give them an opportunity to reassess their situation and go try and get some help. In the next episode, we're going to interview Henry Nixon, the star of Low Life. He will talk a little bit about his character and why he decided to get involved with the Low Life project. So please join us for that episode. And until then, as always, please remember to live in relentless pursuit of your life's purpose.